Hello and welcome along to the first edition of the 2023 Matchbook Cheltenham Previews. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, joined by the same crew as last year. Firstly, I'd like to welcome my partner in crime, Matchbook's very own Micheál Deasy. Micheál, welcome along to the first Ante-Post Cheltenham video. Are you excited?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, starting to get very excited now. When I started to kind of go through the stuff for this, it really gets in the head that Cheltenham is just around the corner.
Yeah, and for you, Matt, firstly, I'd introduce you. Matt Toombs, you're all Cheltenham Matt Toombs. Tell us a little bit about how this sort of time of year, it's January, it's the lead up to the festival, the racing's quiet enough the weekend. It's all about Cheltenham for you.
Absolutely, until really we get into the last batch of trials days over the next 2-3 weeks. We've got to the stage now of discussing individual races, which shows you in core Ante-Post punting season. For punters like me, that's a big part of the fun of the festival. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And those listening for the first time, we're going to cover as many races as we can leading up to the festival. Myself, DC, Matt Toombs will be joining us for a lot of them, and Matt will be coming in with a lot of trends. So if you do want to get involved with the shows, do comment who you think is going to win the Arkle, and we'll screenshot a lot of those comments, and we'll see who's right come March. There were a few winners put up, notably Florin Porter by a certain presenter here, so he's very chuffed with that. And although he's not confident of a rerun of that this year, but there were plenty of winners also put up by DC and Matt throughout the trend. So we'll get straight into it. And before we look at the prices, Matt, we do want to have a look at some of the trends. So people, it's important to know, don't take trends literally, I guess, Matt, firstly, but they're definitely a help and a guide when you're punting.
And that's the crucial point. Don't take them literally. And we'll come to that actually when we have one a bit later on after DC's put his tip up. But here, 2 mile chasing is the most specialist division. Very few horses can run fast enough and also jump fences at that speed to contest the top races. The Arkle is just one crop of horses. When combined with the introduction of the turners, sucks horses out of the Arkle, it means small fields and a predictable race. And so 3 very straightforward trends fall out of that. The simplest is 8 of the last 11 favourites have won. There have only been 2 winners at a double figure price all century. Secondly, since the BHA started giving ratings to Arkle runners in 2008, the top rated runners are 9 from 15, a 78% profit backing them blind. And punters often look on the day, small fields, obvious top rated horses favourite, and think there can't be value at the front of the market. There can, and this is the sort of race where there often is. And the final trend is that this century horses unbeaten over fences, having run over them, are 12 from 50, a 60% profit backing them. So if you're betting on the day, the value tends to be with the obvious horse or horses at the front of the market. Part of our job now, looking at the race from an Ante-Post point of view, is to work out which horse fits that profile and provides the best Ante-Post value to shorten in towards the front of the market.
Absolutely, and that's well laid out, Dees. And very quickly before we get into the betting, it's important to know, so currently on the Matchbook Betting Exchange, we do have the majority of the grade ones, or all the grade ones at the festival priced up. But come the day, given the nature of the Matchbook Betting Exchange, there'll be a lot of opportunities with place markets. The markets themselves get more liquid, and you tend to get the best price on the day with the exchange, just the nature of it.
Yeah, like as you said, you're going to be getting bigger prices. There's been a lot of talk on Twitter and stuff about how Ante-Post betting is dead, but the exchange is the one place where you can get a really good price on something if you think you had an angle. So it is definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And we'll get into the market. We'll have the prices go up on our ticker here below. So currently John Bond's 2.52, Appreciated 6.4, Dice Ardino 6.6, El Fabiola 7.6, and it's about 22.0 bar. The likes of Phil Dore in there, Flame Bear, Sir Gerhard, Banbridge, same what. Matt, where are you kind of looking? And again, it's important to note, so we're recording this on the 16th of January, so about 2 months out from the festival. We're looking for a horse here that will go off shorter on the day. I think it's important to note, because I think we all think that John Bond will probably win the Arkle. But is there a horse in there, maybe at the front of the market, that is probably a tad overpriced?
I think so. And as a general point, I think jumping style is an underplayed factor in terms of what sort of distance suits a horse. And I think that's particularly relevant this year. In staying chases, horses, including the winners, often finish quite tired. Ideal jumping technique, neat, unspectacular, get you into a rhythm, preserve energy for the business end. Standing off and putting in a big leap often is an inefficient use of energy. And that's especially the case if at the steadier tempo of staying chases, horses then rein back in, forfeiting the track advantage that the big jump gave them. And 2 mile chasing is very different. The good horses that jump well, especially on a sound surface, don't get tired. But track advantage from standing off and putting in a big jump can be a really efficient use of energy. And of the Irish novices, the one that looks a classic 2-mile chaser is Dice Up Dynamo. His chasing debut at Leopardstown was in a non-event, but he was excellent. His jumping was superb. When he was on a long stride at the second, he stood off, put in a big jump and landed running like a proper 2-mile chaser. When he was in close, he was quick and nimble, didn't lose momentum. There was only one run, but based on the evidence we've seen so far, he definitely looks to me top of Willie's Arkle pecking order at this early stage, and I say that's a fan of El Fabiolo. Now, the obvious concern for Dice Up Dynamo is he was 2-3 at the festival last year, caused a false start, too keen in the Supreme. He was fine in the parade ring. It was only at the start he got over exuberant. And the delay with Mighty Potter knocking himself, then having to be checked by the vet, that false start, none of that helped Dice Up Dynamo as he used plenty of energy before the race began. He was still going well 3 out when he came down, but I think he'd have fallen in a hole. Willie excused his subsequent flop at Punchestown. He basically had a hard race at Cheltenham. What makes me more optimistic for this year is how much more settled he was on chase debut than on his hurdle starts. He was still forward going, but even on a seasonal debut, didn't come till after Christmas when you might have excused him being very fresh. He was much more professional. Might be maturity, but often the sight of a fence helps settle a horse. And the structure of Cheltenham's old course is a big help in that regard. There's so much jumping early on in the race, which helps a keen horse settle. A simple illustration of that is, of the 5 tracks that host open Grade 1 chases around the minimum trip, the 4th fence is jumped about 21% of the way through the race at Cheltenham, sorry. At the other tracks, Leopardstown, Punchestown, Ascot and Sandown, the 4th is jumped much later, somewhere around 36 to 42% of the way through the race. So the old course is the ideal track for a 2-miler who is a keen but a good jumper. The early fences come up so quickly they help settle a horse down. And timing's all important in anti-post betting. Plenty of punters will say, oh, wait, watch the Irish Arkle, then take a view. The problem with that approach is the value may well have gone by then. It's a specialist predictable division. As the Trends said, the form tends to get repeated. And we know from the Irish Arkle entries the other day that all the main protagonists are going to get entered for the Arkle tomorrow. And if entry numbers are low for the Arkle, then the market leaders could easily contract in consequence. A Dice Up Dynamo's clear favourite for the Irish Arkle in most books around 2.5. Now that prices might be influenced by the perceived likelihood of which horses are going to line up, but it's still a positive. So I think he's worth taking the prices on now around 6.6. That's good value to me.
Okay, and before I bring Deason on that, Matt, I guess, is it a lazy comparison for me to kind of think of a Willie Mullins herder that was always set for chasing as Undersow? Is it a case that maybe if Undersow ran in the Supreme the year before his Arkle, he might not have gone off as short for the Arkle? Is it that sort of thinking with Dice Up Dynamo a little bit?
Yeah, it can be. It depends very much on what the vibes are, I think. Some of these horses, I'm getting the vibes that, for example, Appreciated might well step up in trip. And so even though he's run over 2 miles almost exclusively, rule since that 2.5 mile bumper race a few years ago, he's still, the vibes are that he might stay the trip in the Turners better. So Willie's going to have to shuffle his pack. He likes to have his A-team separate. And when Undersow, as you mentioned, he ran in the Arkle because he was so forward going, he wasn't going to stay 2.5 at that point. Vateur, who a lot of people thought was going to be the Arkle horse having won the Supreme that year, he was flexible. So even though the Arkle might have suited him better, he went for the Turners so Willie could keep them apart and win both races.
Yeah, fascinating. And Willie Mullins bingo, everyone gives out about it, but it's definitely fun to play for sure. DC, maybe quick little thoughts on Dice Up Dynamo lead into your own pick yourself, but it's an interesting horse to back for sure. I backed him for the Supreme last year. Obviously.
Yeah, he was my selection for the Supreme last year, but as Matt said, I think we all kind of knew fairly soon that he wasn't going to win it. And as well as that, an awful lot of the smart money came for Constitution Hill. Dice Up Dynamo wasn't really backed. That for all he went off joint favourite, I'd actually think that Willie sent Sir Gerhard to the Ballymore because he knew that he would win that, and there was no point in taking on Constitution Hill for all that. Dice Up Dynamo gave it a good old shot. But he has been, I thought he was, of the Mullins three, I think just visually he looks the fastest. I thought, as Matt said, I don't appreciate it. Appreciate looks like he could do with a step up and trip. For all that he's one, I think he's the highest rated hurdler in the race. But I like that he sat down more. Something I noticed about him as well is that he raced almost in the middle of the track all the way around. He was never tight to the rail. They gave him as much room as possible. I was saying this in the WhatsApp chat earlier. He kind of reminded me of like when you're going around the long corner and you just keep the foot down in the car and you're just kind of just drifting out a small bit. But he looked like a 2-mile chaser. As you said, no, he looked fast and he jumped well. And I didn't think there was any negatives with him. And I would say he should be clear second favourite. I think, as you said there to start, I think John Bond is probably he's a worthy favourite, and on the Bears farm that we have seen, he is the best horse in the race by a distance. I think he's of all the rivals that have been beaten by these horses, Boot Hill is probably the best of them, and John Bond beat him 8 lengths running away from up the Sandown Hill. I thought that was good form, but this far out, do you want to be like he's probably going to be around the same price in the day, maybe small bit shorter, but we're looking for value in this one. So I have gone for someone which I think is way overpriced, and that is San Ra, another Willie Mullins horse. He's currently in there at 34.0. Now he's late enough to chasing. He had I suppose he kept everyone's radar when he bolted up in the county hurdle there in 2020 off 137, just wildly well handicapped. And he was a lot of people, I think, where he was kind of a shrewd enough bet for the champion hurdle the following year, but it just never really happened for him over hurdles. He won his hurdles debut, and the rest of them then was just a bit of disappointment. But he was like, he's never been beaten that far. He wasn't a bad hurdler. He just wasn't top level. He's gone over fence now this year, and his first race he was beaten by Phil Dore at Navan at the end of November, and I watched that race back this morning, and he went off out in front, and he jumped right at every single fence, and he used up a lot of energy, and he was well beaten, I think, in the end by Phil Dore, but it was a good old pipe opener. They met again at Christmas, and I thought it was a completely different story. They actually rode him completely differently. They sat him out the back. He sat, of the 5 of them, he was well off the pace there for a while. He took a while to improve the jumping. He threw in a few bad ones there out the back in Leopardstown. I think the third fence at the back he was particularly bad at. But as you can see him come around the Swan Turn, he was travelling very, very well. And I thought he put them to bed very easily in the home straight. He jumped well at the last fence. People said that Phil Dore made a mistake, like that mistake. He only lost the length or two. He didn't lose loads of momentum. It wasn't that bad a mistake. I thought. I wouldn't say it was something that completely cost him the race. I thought San Ra was, and he went past them very, very easily. Just ran away from them. To 2 1/4 lengths. I think if there was a bit more in the race, he would have gone further ahead. Visionarian isn't the bad. Like he's not very highly rated, but he plenty of experience over fences. And I think he was put to bed fairly easily. So I think his price is way too big. He shouldn't be a 34.0 shot. He's entered an Irish Arkle. We've actually recorded this the day before the Cheltenham Arkle entries come out, but I'm fairly sure he'll be running. And I think if he turns up on the day, he's going to be significantly shorter than 34.0. So if you're getting that kind of price, even as an each way bet or win place bet at the moment, I wouldn't put anyone off that. But I think he's definitely overpriced at 34.0.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, and look, he was very impressive, as you mentioned, at Christmas, Matt. You have a trend that kind of supports where DC's coming with a small bit of saying, well, and look, 34.0 is a big price. It doesn't take much for you to pull the trigger, I guess, on a price like this.
Absolutely, that's definitely the wrong price. So I can entirely see where DC's come from as a value bet here. The trend is that since 2002, horses that have recorded a Racing Post rating of 160 or more over hurdles the previous season are 10 from 19. 38% profit, lots of winners. San Ra actually recorded an RPR of 159 on 4 occasions. As you were mentioning earlier, you don't take these trends literally. Cut off of 160 is arbitrary. And the fact that he was regularly running to high 150s shows he meets the principle of this theory. Like Samurai, Footpad was 4th in the Champion Hurdle. Tuchevu missed the trend with an RPR 157 was 6th. So I was in Europe running the Arkle, the Champion Hurdle as well. So he's very much got the right sort of profile to be underestimated in the market, whilst everyone's focusing on last year's novice hurdlers. The concern for him, Deasy's touched on this with his jumping at Leopardstown when he won the Grade 1. He isn't very big. Jumping fences looks a bit of an effort for him. He looks like he's trying hard. And if he can cope with jumping at Arkle pace, he's absolutely got the basic speed to be right in this. I definitely think he's the best of the outsiders, and that 34.0 is the wrong price.
And just one thing to know, like the fact that they sat off the pace in a second run and just let him come into the race, I think that could stand to him at Cheltenham if he turns up, because they're, I know that this is the way with a lot of the Irish teams, but they're all front runners. They all seem to be going off out in front and making all and going off and winning it. So I mean, if there's going to be a savage pace in this, which there more than likely will be, it could suit him to just be sitting out the back and popping away and travelling and saving his effort for the end of the race. So
yeah, and as the last touched on with that Irish Arkle, it's going to be fascinating who Woody actually ends up setting there. Woody's current entries in the race: Appreciated, Dicer Dino, El Fabiola, Flamebear, Hador, James de Burley, Sainwa, Sir Gerhard. So like we haven't even mentioned Sir Gerhard. Before I get into my selection, Dee, so I might throw this over to you. Sir Gerhard's such a one where I'm kind of a bit cautious about playing Ante-Post, just because he could end up. I know he's been entered in both chases both novice chases at the Dublin Racing Festival, and he could still end up in a Champion Hurdle. I think he would go down the Champion Hurdle route if it wasn't for Constitution Hill. I think that was the vibe Ruby was given during the week on the road to Cheltenham.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of that. No one is going to want to bother taking on Constitution Hill, having no hope. Yeah, it's how can you, like, Sir Gerhard is a massive price as well now. At the moment, you can get, what is he, 25.0. Like, he's on bear for, like, the Ballymore horses seem to go better as hurdlers. They're speed horses, but there's no reason that he wouldn't do well in this. I wouldn't put anyone off having a small bet off him at 25.0 if you think that this is the likely route, because if it is the likely route, he will definitely be in the top 3 or 4 in the betting if he can jump a fence. Like, he's a talented horse.
Yeah, Matt, handing very briefly Sir Gerhard over to you. It's a tough one. Like, nobody knows currently where he's going, but he has got those entries, and the vibes seem to be a bit more positive with Patrick Mullins also this week speaking that he could potentially run before Cheltenham.
Yeah, the vibes have got a lot better in the last week or so, as you say, and they're talking about getting him out in a beginner's chase in a week or two's time. That sounded much more like the route of going chasing, even at this late stage. Worth pointing out that a couple of Arkle winners this century from just half a dozen runners have won off one run. Work the Great Well Chief and Western Warhorse. So because the Arkle is so much about raw ability and the ability to jump at speed, it's not so much about being battle-hardened and wise over fences as, say, the Broadway is. If he does go there off just one run, I wouldn't rule him out at all.
Yeah, he's a fascinating runner wherever he goes. So stay tuned, particularly on those Dublin Racing Festival entries. One horse that I was not sure whether I was going to put him up. I was going to give him a mention, but I've kind of talked myself around to it in the last few minutes before recording. And it's a horse that I've kind of half got right and half haven't. It's Banbridge, who's currently available at 26.0. Now, it's important to note, and Ruby Walsh always goes on about this in the road to Cheltenham, that there's a massive difference between Leopardstown's 2 miles and Cheltenham's 2 miles. Leopardstown's effectively 2 miles, 1.5 furlongs, are very close to it. And with Cheltenham, it's actually slightly under the 2 miles. It's 1 mile, 7.5 furlongs, thereabouts, very close to 2 miles. So you do want to be with a horse that has been proven over the course and distance, is a speed horse. And to debate whether Banbridge is, like he's been talked about, anything from an Arkle horse this year right up to the National Hunt Chase. And that's just my own opinion. So I can imagine everyone else has fluctuated on this horse's best trip. But I was there for Cheltenham, and I was very impressed with his jumping at Cheltenham. Now, the form of the race hasn't worked out particularly well. It's not like it's worked out terribly. He didn't beat anyone of great note, and he was very poor at Ferryhouse, although you can excuse possibly the ground and maybe a little bit of the trip perhaps as well. So I just think at a sort of 26.0, I'm getting a bit of put the kettle on vibes from this horse. And look, it's a horse that, as we know, he can jump very well. It's a speed test. I think this horse will be up for the speed test. He is entered in the Irish Arkle, so it is one of those I will be, because I don't think there'll be a massive price change on this when he does get entered the Dublin Racing Festival. So maybe hold off to see, is he entered in the Irish Arkle? If he is, that indicates to me that he will probably go to Cheltenham, and I'd be happy to back him at a big price, even if he didn't perform overly well at Leopardstown, given the differences of the track, like I mentioned. So, look, the horse had one thing to know is Martin Pipe win last year was over 2.5. He was stepped up to 3 in Aintree. I definitely napped him on that day to win at Aintree, as I thought he was a 3-miler at the time, and he didn't perform well at all. He went off 5-2 favourite though. It does show he is fancy. JJ Slavin has a great partnership with the horse as well. So I just think at a price, he's rode him the last 4 times. I think at a price, if you're looking for someone, as Dees mentioned, that will go off shorter, I can see Banbridge on the day being 12s, 14s, 16s going off and just running into a second, third place. And if it is a below par Arkle, which I don't think it is personally, but Put the Kettle On did win a below par Arkle jumping and with her speed, that I think Banbridge could be that one at 26.0. So our 3 selections put up are Deasy's is St. Watt around 34.0. Myself, it's Banbridge 26.0, and Dysart Dynamo at 6.6. Dees, over to you. Is there any other horses you want to mention in the market to keep an eye on for those watching this in January, like we are, and maybe 2 months out from the festival?
Not really, no. Like I couldn't have Flame Bearer now, to be honest. He's still in there. It's just there's too much to improve at this stage. Like, I mean, we were talking about like who's going to turn up in this, and we said it's going to be probably Willie will have 3 or 4 John Ban and a couple of randomers, and the randomers to keep an eye on, I suppose. Maybe Boot Hill, as mentioned him earlier. Boot Hill followed up that 8-length defeat by John Ban, beat Knock-and-Risk I thought he went very well. Is he going to go here, or will he step up and trip the small? But he might be one of the other ones that could shorten. But I think the top of the market is fairly tight, and I think they have a hard favourite to beat. For all we thought, put up big prices, like, you can't ignore how good John Ban has been so far.
Yeah, the 2 I'll put to you, Matt, in the top 4 of the betting, as we mentioned earlier. Appreciate at 6.4, which you touched on. You reckon he'll go Turners. And then there's El Fabiola at 7.6.
Yeah, a fan of El Fabiolo. He probably put the least impressive jumping round of those 3 in. It was still a decent round for a debutant at Fairyhouse. He hit the 4th, bunny hopped 2 out, landing on all 4s. He jumped soundly on a good stride, but he was novice when he wasn't. He's probably only going to get 1 more run before the Arkle, and that in a hot Irish Arkle. So he's going to have to improve his fencing technique quickly. It's really basically straight away on his next start. I'm open-minded about what he achieved in the top novices when he was just run out of it by John Bon. On the face of it, he was unlucky, hampered 3 out, made a mistake at the last. And given he was much the less experienced of the pair, you can make a case he's the better prospect. Certainly I was thinking that at the start of the season. But perhaps John Bon was the classic Henderson embryonic chaser who was soft trained for the Supreme Sprinter Sacra style. Aintree might have been feeling the effects of trying to mix it with Constitution Hill. So I'm not sure quite how good that form's worth, but El Fabiolo's had just 6 runs in his life. He's much the least exposed of these main contenders. It'll be fascinating to see how he gets on in the Irish Arkle, assuming he goes there.
Yeah, and look, this has been built up, as DC and Matt touched on. We're recording this today before Arkle entries. Not expecting too many surprises. As I say, the majority of all the horses we talked about will be entered in, but the Irish Arkle coming up on the February Bank Holiday in Ireland is going to be one to watch. Do check out our horse racing podcast. We record weekly on either a Thursday or Friday. That's with Tom Stanley and the gang. We'll be back next Monday. Keep an eye on our YouTube channel and the podcast feed. You should have a Cheltenham preview every Monday in your feed or your YouTube channel. Until then, we'll chat to you next week. Enjoy the racing, and we look forward to the festival. Bye-bye.